It's Doug Sesserman. I'm in my virtual office in New York City. It's hashtag Webinar Wednesdays at the American Associates Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. I'm proud to serve as the CEO. This is our 18th webinar since the pandemic hit. And today we're featuring three prominent alumni of Ben-Gurion University who work in the United States. We have Shimon Elkabetz in Boston, Dr. Yulia Sapir in New York City, and we have Dror Berman in Silicon Valley. The goal of this webinar series is for you to spend today an hour with us, just to get a glimpse into the great work happening at Ben-Gurion University and the amazing work that some of our alumni are doing across the world, and in particular in the States. We're joined by participants here in the States, also from Israel and Canada. So thank you all for joining us. We are live on Facebook. So we're going to start with Shimon. The way this webinar is going to work is I'm going to introduce briefly each one of the participants. We're going to have a conversation about the work they do in the States and their experience at BGU. And as an audience, you can ask questions however you would like. The best way to ask those questions is to click on the Q&A function. I'll be able to read the questions and then give them to the respective speakers. So with that, let's begin. So Shimon, you are the CEO and co-founder of ClimaCell. Shimon Elkabetz is a technology entrepreneur. And as I mentioned, the CEO and co-founder of ClimaCell, a weather intelligence platform. He's passionate about building innovative products, superstar teams, and thoughtful culture while generating value for customers. In 2016, he co-founded ClimaCell after spending 11 years in the Israeli Air Force, where he served as a pilot and filled several commanding and managerial positions. During his IDF service, Shimon was exposed to the dramatic impact of weather on flight operations. He holds a BA in economics from Ben-Gurion University of the Negev and an MBA from Harvard, some little known school there somewhere in Boston, where he currently resides. Shimon, welcome to hashtag Webinar Wednesdays. It's a little after noon Eastern time. Tell us a little bit about your work at ClimaCell.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. So ClimaCell, as you mentioned, is a Boston-based American company. What we're doing is really helping every individual and organization better manage their weather-related challenges by providing them accurate weather data in the history, in the forecast, as well as business intelligence. So we work with organizations like the NFL, the US Open Tennis, Uber, Via, the ride-sharing companies, airlines from Delta, United, JetBlue, Aeromexico, all the way to utility companies in India like IndiGrid, or in Japan like SoftBank Energy, and in the US like National Grid, Evergy, and many other verticals. So I started ClimaCell in 2016 while being a student at Harvard, together with two other Israeli friends. One of them is also an alum of BGU, also a pilot. And basically ever since we raised a few rounds of venture capital in an amount of about 100 million, which fortunately is a lot. And basically trying to grow the business all the way to become the biggest weather technology brand out there. Over time, we also opened a few offices abroad in Tel Aviv. One of them, it's the second biggest office of ClimaCell. So it was a nice closure for us to be able to connect the company back to Israel somehow. And that's really on a high level.
Excellent. We're getting one question from Lori Dinister-Kurz, who joined us. She's just asking for the speakers to speak up as best as you can. And Lori,
Sure.
maybe you can, on your computer, find the volume button and just try to maximize that out as well. Shimon, so were you at Chetzarim Air Force Base?
Correct. Yeah, I spent 3 years in Chetzarim, and this is where I did my bachelor. It was 1 year. I took economy, and basically in 1 year we did what the other students did in 3 years. It was pretty funny when we did the first semester exam with the first year, the second semester with the second year, and the third semester with the third year. So it was pretty condensed. So it's not the classic academic experience, especially not the one comparing to the US MBA. But for me, it was the only academic experience until I was about 28. And it was refreshing. Everything around the economy I got from my bachelor, and the fundamentals of understanding. I still remember the professors at the BGU. They were fantastic. They either came to our campus or we went to the Be'er Sheva campus, and only good memories. My wife is also a pilot, and she was at about the same classes as I am, and she was also there. So it's in the family.
So you met your wife at Chetzarim and at the Air Force Base?
Yeah, but only after a few years we actually started dating. So I can't take it to Be'er Sheva. It's actually Tel Aviv that brought us together.
Was she? Did she pursue you or did you pursue her? No, it doesn't matter. Okay. So one thing I just want you to one thing I'd love for you to comment on that I'm sure our audience is most likely not familiar with. In the United States, if you're in the Air Force, you get your wings and your degree from the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. But in Israel, in your case, you get your wings at the Chetzarim Air Force Base, not far outside of Be'er Sheva. But you actually got your degree at Ben-Gurion University while you're serving as a pilot. So can you just tell us about that experience a little bit in Israel?
Yeah, so look, usually it's very unique to the Air Force and specifically to the Flight Academy because most, let's call it the normal service of an Israeli citizen in the military doesn't include any academic experience. So the Air Force doesn't have the certification or the academic capability like in the US that has a large volume, so they were able to actually establish a university. So to solve that problem, basically, they partnered almost 20 years ago now with the Ben-Gurion University to create back at the time, it was 4 different type of degrees that Flight Academy cadets could choose from. The basic principle is that there are no discounts. It's the same exact thing. The exams are done together with the civil side of Ben-Gurion, but it is pretty condensed. So the degrees are just finished within 1 year because it's part of the requirement. So out of the 3 years of the Flight Academy, about 1 year is dedicated to academics, and it's done while you still have commitment to the Flight Academy in general.
Thank you. That was very interesting. We're getting a question from Jeffrey Ullman, who's on our board of directors. He's asking about ClimaCell. Can you say anything about what you do that is different or better than weather.com or other commercial weather prediction companies?
Yeah, sure. So in general, weather is obviously super important, only going to get more important as it becomes more volatile. I don't know, Dror probably has some air quality issues where he resides. You can download our app and see when you can go for a run. But on a high level, this is one of those topics where the government is still leading the technology. Just like in space exploration, NASA is still leading it. There aren't many domains technology-wise where governments are still leading. Weather is still one of them. So Weather.com or AccuWeather or all of those brands that you know are actually type of media companies, pretty old, that basically repackage the free governmental outputs of forecasts. And what ClimaCell is doing that is different in that context is that we have our own sensors that we generate from all kinds of unique innovations. I won't dive into that. And more importantly, we run our own model on powerful computing in the cloud. So when we run those models, we can choose the resolution, we can choose the business problem we try to solve. For example, smoke in the Bay Area in Oregon, and helping people make decisions like we work with the 49ers and the NFL, and we help them set the perfect timing for practice, because they literally cannot practice these days in every time of the day because of the smoke. It can be a very different problem, like applying high resolution model in India and helping a utility company have the most accurate prediction to make decision about where to stuff people before the cyclone hits their territory. The other two things that we're doing that is very different from those companies is that we are not service companies, meaning we're not solving the problem by solving with meteorologists on the phone or stationing someone. We actually built a software that is multi-vertical software and has templates for different industries and jobs, similar to Excel, where all kinds of people can use. So it's software solutions, either API or dashboard or mobile application. And lastly, which I think is the most important piece, we don't just provide raw weather data. We actually try to give the customer what it means for the customer and what we recommend to do, which is a very different type of value. I can tell you something like, hey, tomorrow 50 knots between 6 to 7, and I can tell you something like, at this mile marker between 1:45 to 2:15, you should stop the train because there's a risk of derailment and it's exceeding your protocols. So make sure that this train is stopped at that time. This is weather intelligence. It's not weather forecast or weather data. So these are the three differentiators and what makes us unique versus what you have out there in the market.
Thank you very much, Shimon. So Sister Abigail Judah, who's one of our regular participants on our webinar series, says, Shalom, and thank you for your service. She just asked if by chance, while you were at the Air Force Base, did you do any charity work with an orphanage nearby called Streams of the Desert? Are you familiar with them?
Not this one specifically, but definitely we did a lot of volunteering work in the region and outside of the region. So
that's integrated into being part of being a pilot, part of your.
It's very much encouraged. It's done both in the flight academy setting, but also within the squadrons in the Air Force. So, for example, my wife volunteered for about 7 years in a place called Beta Galgalim, a place where basically parents for children with disabilities, they just needed fresh air once every few weeks, and the kids needed some framework and the ability to enjoy each other. And a group of young people just had a facility where they spent every 6 weeks a weekend with the kids. The parents used to enjoy their life and have fun. The kids had a blast, and this is an example of an activity.
Excellent. One last question, then we'll move to Yulia. So you're from the Galil up north, correct? Tell us about what does the Negev and Beersheba mean to you?
First of all, it's beautiful, very quiet and peaceful. And I think this is where, Ben-Gurion used to say that this is, the future of Israel will be, I don't know how it is actually translated, but I'll just try. The future of Israel will be measured or tested in the Negev. And I've seen the Negev doing a phenomenal progress actually from the air, seeing how real estate is being evolved, how Beersheba is becoming a hub for students. Actually, the entire economy activity in the city is very much driven by it, and I was able to see it. So Beersheba is really the capital of a beautiful region. And I honestly think that Israel will have no choice. It's just it's numbers, but to go and develop even more the Negev and the Galil.
Excellent. Thank you, Shimon.
Sure.
So Dr. Yulia Sapir-Lekhovitser is the Chief Science Officer of Fesarius Therapeutics, which is a biotechnology firm that has commercialized a patented collagen hydrogel technology. Hopefully you're going to explain to us what that means. She joined Fesarius Therapeutics in 2017 to lead the company's research and development efforts to produce a branded product called Dermosphere, a dermal regeneration collagen hydrogel scaffold. Wow. You're gonna have to explain to me whether or not I need to use that, or who does.
I hope not. I hope not. I'll explain it. I hope no one ever needs to use that.
In July of this year, her team received an intent to award from the National Institutes of Health Phase 2 grant to advance the further development of Dermosphere. And receiving this Phase 2 award is probably the single biggest stamp of approval for an early stage life science company. Congratulations.
Thank you. Actually, we did get awarded since then, so it's final.
Okay, you'll have to tell us about that.
Sure.
Yulia did all of her collegiate work of studies, bachelor's all the way through her PhD at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, which we are really completely thrilled about. And she currently lives in New York City with her family. Yulia, tell us about your work.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about what we do. So at Fesarius Therapeutics, I will talk about our first product, even though we have several products in our pipeline. Our first product, Dermosphere, is a dermal regeneration scaffold. It's a biomaterial-based medical device, and its intended use is for scenarios of extensive skin loss. So I really hope no one will need that, because the problem in human body is then that whenever the person loses full thickness of his or her skin, it will not be able to regenerate. So essentially, if it cannot be stitched up over certain size, the consequences are pretty bad, let's put it this way. So our product is intended to be placed instead of the lost skin, and the proprietary architecture and what you just called micro-patterned architecture of our scaffold induces the cells to repopulate the scaffold and regenerate new skin. And that definitely—
Can this be used for a burn victim also, or?
Yeah, surprisingly, majority of full thickness skin loss cases are tumor excision. I also, before I joined the company, I also thought it probably is mainly for burn victims, clearly for those victims as well. But you'd be surprised how many people in tumor excision scenarios have major problems due to lack of adequate solutions to full thickness skin loss. It doesn't even have to be skin cancer. Soft tissue tumors where the doctor has to take margins around the tumor sometimes may end up with a gaping wound and no really adequate solution to how to replace the lost skin that our body does not know how to replace. So our product does that significantly faster than any of our competitors. Clearly, the huge advantage of that, clearly cutting the time. Cutting the time means cutting the suffering of the patient, consequences such as wound contamination. You can imagine being with an open wound for more than 0 time means chances of wound contamination, infection, sepsis, and death. On top of that, healthcare bills are material part of what typically patients care about a lot, as well as just all sorts of things that can go wrong while you wait for the wound to close and heal. So our product is there to do the magic and heal the wound faster. as well as regenerate the skin in the best possible way, allowing the person to enjoy life as much as possible. And I'll just give an example. When the body heals, with some of our competitors, the skin over time will contract significantly and will develop really stiff scars. And if you can imagine having scarred tissue on, any functional area that needs, the flexibility of the skin there, like on the neck or, elbow or, anywhere on the body where the flexibility of the skin is very important for movement, those scars prevent this movement and cause pain and suffering. It's especially critical for kids because they grow and scar tissue cannot grow with them. So we see our product as very promising in resolving and being a solution to those challenges in future. We are, as you mentioned, so I joined the company 3 years ago. And since then, my job, as was literally, as was presented to me, is to do the magic. So this is what I do in the past 3 years. I do the development, and I have an amazing team that helps me to face the challenges. We have just received our phase 2 SBIR funding. It's about $1.7 million of government funding. And indeed, this means, this is really very important milestone for us. We're gearing towards our FDA submission. Our timelines are very tight, and, we hope to be there very soon to, hit the market and start helping patients.
So Sister Abigail's paying a lot of attention to your talk. She's asking, does Dermosphere contain collagen to help promote wound healing?
Correct. It's collagen-based hydrogel.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your experience at BGU. You have your doctorate degree from the Department of Biotechnology Engineering, correct?
That's correct. Well, I've spent many years at BGU. I did my bachelor's, I did my full master's, and then I did my PhD, all in Ben-Gurion, same department. Back then, I felt that was the only place in Israel that did what I was interested in, the bioengineering and the field that I was excited about, regenerative medicine, biomaterial design, tissue engineering. I was in Professor Smadar Cohen's lab, and she's one of the leaders in this field in the country and even in the world. I also, just like Shimon mentioned, I saw how Beersheva and Ben-Gurion grows and changes and evolves over time. I started all of my degrees in early 2000s. It was fairly small university. And, the city was fairly small. Now it grew significantly, and the university is probably 3 times the size compared to, when I started. So, it's just amazing to see the growth and how things evolve over time.
Yeah, many of our supporters remember a time when there were more camels than students in Beersheba. But today we have 20,000 students, 2/3 undergrad, 1/3 graduate. We're the fastest growing university in Israel in the research fields. And your area is one of our specialties. Could you just comment a little bit? You mentioned the lab in regenerative medicine. Could you talk a little bit about the interdisciplinary nature of research, how the different departments work together?
Absolutely. So I can talk about my personal experience and how Ben-Gurion really allowed me to get the expertise I was allowed to get during my PhD. So during my studies, Professor Smadar Cohen had a collaborator in Drexel in Philadelphia, also BGU alum, who had a lab at Drexel. And I actually had 2 supervisors and worked in both labs. 6 months here and 6 months there. And, it was a great opportunity to learn from his expertise. He was an expert on magnetic materials and magnetic actuation of regenerative approaches and how to control things with magnetic field. So I was given this amazing opportunity to travel and learn and bring our expertise to his lab and his expertise into our lab. And I don't have experience to compare it to other universities, but that was amazing and definitely allowed me to develop, even on a personal level, experiences and like develop myself in various panels, on different levels.
Tell me one thing about your experience at BGU that was not academic that you remember.
Oh, wow. Well, so that's not academic. Well, I'm trying to pick one. So, I used to teach. For 8 years, I taught chemistry to electrical engineers. And the main challenge for me was, because I was the lecturer, and the main challenge was that they just couldn't understand why they need chemistry. They're like, we're electrical engineers. Why do we need that? Why are you here? And the challenge was to make them understand that and actually enjoy. And by the end of the semester to, come and thank me for, kind of getting a little bit in-depth knowledge in chemistry. We also volunteered a lot. That was something that was just part of our department. I was very lucky to participate in this kind of program that was initiated by our department. It's called, in Hebrew, it's called Halon LeBiotechnologia, and in English, I believe it's like Window to Biotechnology, where we would bring kids from everywhere in the South and show them what biotech is really all about, take them and show them things in our labs. And I work with biomaterials, so it's a lot like magic. And for like 5th graders, it's magic. It's not like magic. It is magic. You can show them how you can make artificial caviar and how you, make things out of nothing. And you can show them how you like move things by just looking at them. And this is amazing. And I really hope that it helped many of them to potentially at least appreciate this field as a field that they may be interested in future. That was in collaboration with Department of Education, and that was a great program because some of those kids just would never have an opportunity to get exposed to something like that. So I was very lucky to be part of that.
Thank you. Ben-Gurion University is the only university in Israel that has 3 mandates, right? A mandate for education, a mandate for world-leading research, and a mandate to help develop the region and work with the communities around it. And we have over 60% of our student body that volunteers. The last president of Ben-Gurion University, Rivka Carmen, used to talk about it as the Beersheba spirit. So we're now 2 for 2 for volunteerism. We'll see if we go 3 for 3. So thank you, Yulia. We're going to move to Dror. All right, Dror Berman, he's the founding partner of Innovation Endeavors. He's been in the States for 13 years. In 2010, Dror co-founded Innovation Endeavors with Eric Schmidt, MIT Innovation Fellow and former CEO and Executive Chairman of Google. From agriculture to computational biology to fulfillment centers and satellites, Innovation Endeavors invests in early stage startups that are driving exponential rates of change in their industries. During his IDF service, Dror was part of an elite special forces unit in the intelligence corps. He earned his BS in computer science, which is one of our top ranked programs at Ben-Gurion University, as well as his MBA from a little known school on the West Coast called Stanford University. He currently lives in Silicon Valley with his wife, 3 young children, and including a set of energetic twins, which Dror, you and I have that in common. My twins are now 25. I hope you survive. So Dror, tell us a little bit about innovation endeavors, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And it was fascinating to hear the stories from Shimon and Yulia. So thank you for sharing that. And I also say that looking back at the past year, I think we had the honor of hosting probably the last physical get-together for the alumni group of Ben-Gurion University here in Silicon Valley, just in, I think it was February, and it looks like a different decade now, but it was just sort of just a few months ago. And I want to say also that I'm very happy that you are sort of taking on this idea of building a community of alumni. I think it's very important, and it's great to engage with this great community. Quickly about innovation endeavors and my personal history with that. So as you mentioned, I started innovation endeavors back in 2010 with Eric Schmidt, who was then the CEO of Google. And the genesis of it was mostly speaking to Eric and thinking about the future. And we were looking not at the next 5 or 10 years, we were actually looking at the next 50 years or a century, thinking about what is it that we need to solve to basically allow us all to live in a better world. We recognized that at the time, there was a lot of innovation that was happening in the digital world. We could definitely order things faster and more cheaply through the internet. But at the same time, we were not making fast enough progress in solving some of the most critical challenges that the world was facing and was about to face, right? Anything from climate change that, I live in California, so the last few weeks we couldn't leave the house because of the fires, and this has been getting worse every year, given sort of how warm and how crazy the climate has become, all the way to thinking about innovation in the life sciences world. And, this is also very timely this year, given COVID, but we are seeing that the pace of innovation to develop therapeutics and vaccines just hasn't been fast enough, and we need to push to make it much faster and much cheaper. In fact, over the last decade, it became twice as expensive to develop, to take out commercially a new drug than it was the 10 years before. And similarly, if you think about food and agriculture, for example, we recognize that by 2050, when we have 10 billion people on the planet, we'll need to be able to increase food production by 70% just to meet the needs to feed as many people. And so one of the things that we recognized was that if you sort of take the trajectory of innovation that has happened over the last few decades and project it forward, we were not going to be able to meet those challenges. And as we look more deeply into that, we recognize that a lot of this slow pace of innovation compared to the digital world was really based on the fact that the innovation process really hasn't changed much in a lot of those industries, specifically in the physical and biological world. Up until that point, a lot of it would be based on a group of scientists going through this design, build, test cycle that we've been doing for a very long time now. And that worked to some extent, but in some of those industries, as I said, it would take us decades and billions of dollars sometimes to make a step function improvement. At the same time, we recognized that the technology world was moving much faster, and we could leverage that. Specifically, we were looking at 3 categories of technologies that were emerging and to some extent converging to allow us to accelerate those industries significantly faster. We're looking at instrumentation and data, and I think Shimon is an expert in that, but really creating the ability to now capture a lot of types of data that were never available before. And we could do it exponentially faster and better, as time goes by. We looked into advances in computation, and this is Eric's expertise, but looking at anything from cloud computing to edge computing to machine learning. But essentially, this was all leading us to a world where we could take massive amounts of data, ingest them, and then come out with insights and prediction in a much faster, better, cost-effective way than ever before. And then the third aspect that were interesting for us was this idea of advanced engineering and robotics, really taking this ability to take all those insights and translate them back into the physical world and actually the biological world. If you think about the world, what's going on in the synthetic biology space, again, in a very quick and a very cost-effective way. And so that led us to believe that, if you start projecting forward, we would be able to create a new type of companies that would lean on this ability to create a super evolution. This is the term that we coined. And the idea behind super evolution was that we can now put machine or machines in the sort of at the core of the innovation process together with scientists. But those machines could now allow us to design infinite number of experiments to be run at the same time. We could use engineering to automate our way to running those experiments, and then we can use instrumentation to collect back all the data that we found and feed it back into a central learning system that would help us design the next set of experiments and do it in a significantly better way than ever before. And ultimately, we believe that if you look at some of those industries, we could now run 1000x more experiments at 1/1000th of the cost and time. And you start seeing, if you sort of start compounding that, you start seeing that this has an exponential effect on sort of the pace of innovation. And we believe that if you couple that with very ambitious entrepreneurs and the right capital sources, you could now start building companies that would not try to sell technology to incumbents, but actually compete with incumbents in a lot of those industries, and would be sort of the next generation of iconic companies that we all look at. And so that was really the genesis of the fund back in 2010. Since then, we've raised 3 funds. We've been very, very active. We've been growing the firm. We've been investing in over 150 companies in this period of time, including being first money in or early money in companies like Uber and Planet Labs and SoFi and Form Labs. So a lot of companies that grew to become iconic in their fields. But I think most importantly, we've been very excited to work with very ambitious entrepreneurs that are trying to change the world and try to be catalysts of change in that. And we've been very proud that a lot of our companies have been creating not only financial impact, but also true human impact.
Do you invest just in companies in the Valley, or have you made investments in Israel?
We've made many investments in Israel. In fact, all of our partners, every one of our partners sit on boards of companies in Israel. What we found over time is that a lot of the Israeli companies tend to come to Silicon Valley and New York actually faster than they used to, and they are interested in the kind of help that we can provide them from them. So we've been very actively investing. We also have BGU entrepreneurs in our portfolio. And I think that's maybe one point I wanted to make, that if I look at the last 10 years, I would say that there's been a disproportionate amount of entrepreneurs, postdocs, generally talent, industry leaders and so on, that has come out from BGU. And I was thinking before this conversation about why is it, why is it that we see a disproportionate amount of people coming out of Ben-Gurion University. And I think that a lot of it has to do that BGU does not only attract some of the smartest people in Israel, to do the best academic work. I think Yulia is a great example of that. But I think it's also attracting and helping develop the cultural maturity and the emotional capacity that is required to be a very good leader in business, in academia, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something that is unique to Ben-Gurion, and that's what attracted me to come to Ben-Gurion over any other university in Israel.
That's great. I'm going to change my virtual background real quickly. So this is the map, an aerial map of the university, right? We refer to it as the innovation ecosystem, which is our campus, Soroka Medical Center across the street, the Advanced Technology Park where a number of our engineers work, now 3,000 employees, 70 companies, 40 of them multinationals from the States, and the IDF's elite communication and IT units campus just adjacent. It's a remarkable system. Dror, one question I have for you, because you're there in Stanford. Sometimes we talk, or in Silicon Valley, sometimes we talk about BGU as being the Stanford of Israel. And you were just talking about the entrepreneurial spirit and activity that's happening. In fact, PitchBook just acknowledged Ben-Gurion University of the Negev as one of the top 50 universities in the world for entrepreneurism. So when we say we're the Stanford, are we kidding ourselves, or is that real?
I think Stanford is a unique place in the sense that it's been very entrepreneurial for many years and they've had time to perfect it. I would say that BGU strikes me as very entrepreneurial and is making all the right steps to become what Stanford is now. It's been fascinating. I've been actually involved with some of the efforts that are going this direction. Specifically, I think, both the President Chaimovitz and Dana Gavish, who is working in Yazamut 360, and Roy at Cactus Capital and so on, have been doing an amazing work in starting to build a foundation. actually, as part of their visit here, I helped them get into some of the, to get exposure to some of the work that's being done at Stanford. And I think there's a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes to build new programs and new skill sets at BGU to allow the university to really leapfrog and become what I think could become the best or the most entrepreneurial university in Israel. And it's been amazing also to see some of the work that, again, the President Khaimovitz has done over the last few months through COVID, and exposing a lot of the talent, really creating those skunk work teams to think about what can we do as a university to help with COVID, and some of the things that came out of it in diagnostics and therapeutics and so on have been amazing to see. So I would say that there's all the right type of work is being done. I think on the other end, again, a lot of the key skill sets are required for entrepreneurs to go beyond just the academic skill sets and studying computer science or electrical engineering. It's really the leadership capabilities that you need as a leader of a company. That's really the complicated part of building a company. And I think Ben-Gurion University, more than probably any other university, is investing a lot in attracting the right type of talent that has this type of leadership skills, but also I think increasingly is doing better in fostering more leadership skills to help those people grow as leaders. And I think there is a program that is coming out, I don't know if it's been published or not, to do it in an even more focused and concentrated way. And I think this is going to be amazing.
Yeah, you may be speaking about the OASIS Accelerator Program.
No, there is. I don't want to reveal it. I think there is a very specific program that is coming out that I've been honored to help a little bit with. That is coming out to support leaders coming out of the university, and I think it's going to be released in the next academic year. But I think there's also going to be more collaboration with Stanford. I'm trying to bring in more folks from Stanford to be involved in that. And so there is certainly a lot of work and focus on developing the right leadership out of Ben-Gurion University.
Excellent. So do you want to tell us anything else about some of the investments you're making that are going to change our lives, or is that all top secret?
Investments. We have a lot of companies that I'm very excited about. So it's always hard for me to pick one. I'll speak quickly about a few that I think are interesting. Maybe try to select some that have some Israeli context as well. We're investors in a company called UCO that is based in Israel that is looking into the life sciences aspect or the biological aspects of allergies, working in parallel to both find therapeutics for certain types of allergies, specifically peanut allergies, but also on generating food that would not create those kind of allergies for all of us, or for those of us that basically suffer from allergies. And we all know that some of those allergies are deadly, and actually the percentage of people with allergies has been increasing significantly over the last couple of decades. So that's one. Another interesting one is a company based in Israel and New York called Fabric that is building micro-fulfillment centers. You can think about them as very small footprint, but very active, robotic-driven facilities that basically help us fulfill orders, online orders that we all increasingly need today in a significantly better, cheaper way. If you think about it, sort of even before COVID, but certainly post-COVID, it's very hard to attract people to work in those kind of work today. Working in a fulfillment center, lifting packages, it's post-COVID, sort of in a world where we really don't want to be with many other people in a small environment. This company is seeing significant momentum now that basically allows it to keep growing and expanding in the US. And then finally, I would say there is an interesting company that we invested in that is based here. It's a company called Skylo, was born out of the business school at Stanford in combination with the Aeroastro group at Stanford, that is building a completely new architecture to develop the type of connectivity that would allow us to connect with any sensor around the world in a very cost-effective way. That company came out, has raised over $100 million by now, but interestingly enough, chose to develop their R&D center in Israel because Israel holds a lot of the very specific talent that we need for the type of work that we are doing. And so it hybridized, unlike most companies that start in Israel and then move to the US, maybe more similar to Shimon's company. We've started here, and the founder was not he's Indian in origin. He chose to go to Israel and start an R&D center there, and we were very happy to help him do that. So there's a lot of hybridization that starts to happen between the US and Israel in many, many different aspects.
Let me ask you one more question about robotics that you mentioned. At Ben-Gurion University, we think actually we may have the most comprehensive robotics program in all of Israel. We have an initiative called the ABC, Agricultural, Biological, Cognitive Robots. There's a lot of interaction between the university and the IDF. We have the robots we can talk about, the robots we can't talk about. What's your perspective in Silicon Valley and seeing a lot of robotic innovation at how Ben-Gurion University stacks up?
I'd be very honest and say that I haven't spent a lot of time with the robotics department at BGU. I've talked to a couple of companies. It seems to be that there is a lot more work being done recently. There was one coming out recently that developed a universal gripper. So basically the gripping problem hasn't been really solved. So what kind of gripper do you want to use if you want to pick something up? Picking something up is not as easy as it looks. And so there was a group that was working on that. But I would say that in general, it's still early in a lot of the robotics world. The interesting focus now has moved from what we look at as robotics in structured environments, what we've been seeing for a very long time in the automotive world, for example, in manufacturing environments, into robotics in semi-structured and unstructured environments. I think that unstructured environments, we're still not ready yet to have robots that are completely working in completely unstructured environment. But in semi-structured environments, for example, in agriculture, we start seeing a lot of new applications, especially combining robotics and computer vision, that basically allow us to do things in a completely different way than we've done before. Another area is surgical robotics. I'm an investor in a company called Vicarious Surgical that uses VR headsets and micro robotics to allow surgeons to now beam themselves into the patient's body and essentially do operations. It's also Boston-based. It's a team out of MIT. So there's a lot more coming, and I feel like we're just in the beginning of that.
Excellent. I want to remind our participants as we're starting to close this webinar, if you have a question, just click on the Q&A function. I'll do my best to get to it. So Shimon, Yulia, Dror, why don't we just have some sort of closing comments while we're waiting for some more questions on your experience at Ben-Gurion, or maybe even let's talk a little bit about your families. You're all married to Israelis, but all of your children have been born in the States. They have kind of dual identities. Just give us a little sense for what it's like to be an Israeli living in the States, raising a family, and what are your plans for the future? Maybe we start with Shimon.
Yeah. So honestly, I never thought that I would leave Israel. Never thought that I'm going to live in the US for that long. It's only 5 years, not 13 like Dror, but it's still more than I expected. I think that a lot of entrepreneurs are doing the move as Dror described because of the company's journey and the necessity of the founders to move to the US. And my move was actually similar to Dror. I came for Harvard, and the culture assimilation, let's call it, was easier, I believe. And unlike a lot of the entrepreneurs who live in the US, most of my friends are actually American in Boston, because I was able to spend about 2 years while actually building ClimaCell, but trying to understand. And actually, I like the culture difference. I enjoy it. I think that, and I never worked in a business setting in Israel. I came from the Air Force, which has its own organizational culture, which I like. And I found the business setting much more convenient and much more comfortable for me. Having conversations with American investors versus Israeli investors, it's very apparent to see both how the culture impacts the business setting, as well as the point of view on businesses, the long-term view versus the short-term view, as an example, and I enjoy it. I think it's an advantage because once you are aware of the differences, and you can take the good Israeli pieces and take the less optimal ones and lower it down and play between the two worlds, and I enjoy it. And I hope that going back to Israel won't be too difficult from that perspective.
Yulia, would you like to comment?
Well, you've asked a very philosophical question. I am a double immigrant. I moved to Israel when I was 16, and that comes with its own challenges. And many years later, I moved to the US. And I think I typically consider that as an advantage because, as Shimon just mentioned, I personally have a triple identity, everything and nothing at the same time. I do not consider myself neither one of those identities as 100% because it's impossible. But it allows you to be more flexible. You're much more adaptable. I can give you a good example. When I was in the Army, I was logistics officer, and working in logistics and supply, you work with all sorts of people. And I just found myself speaking in a similar manner to those people. Sometimes you just like adapt how you speak to certain people because you like talk in like their manner. It's like their language in a way, right? So the same applies to when you move to a new country, you start adapting. And you can tap into different experiences you have. So you become much more flexible. Your mind is more flexible. And this is a definite advantage, in my opinion. It also gives you much better perspective on things because you're not limited by a certain point of view. You can like think a little broader. So I consider this as an advantage. And you did ask before we started the webinar if my kid considers herself, like what she considers herself. So she speaks 3 languages, and I think she is very confused, and even more so kids at her school is very confused because they do not understand why we speak one language at home, one language at school, and she was born in a third country, like what is going on? But it's all good. It all, if you look at the positive sides, it definitely can be considered an advantage.
Do you think in English, Hebrew, or Russian?
It depends who I talk to. And at home with my husband, we speak in a horrible mixture. So,
no, I'm asking in terms of how you think. Do you think in one language?
I think in a horrible mixture if I talk to a person. I think, well, in different languages, you have different words that do not have an alternative in another language. So it's easiest for me to speak to someone who is, has similar experiences and speaks same language as I do, because, then I can like take a good, really compatible word from one language and, put it into the sentence to make my point even better. But yeah, I to your question, I do think in the language I talk at the moment, like I do not translate. That would make my talking ability very challenging.
Thank you. Dror, you've been in the States the longest, 13 years. Just give us a little reflection for your family life and what it feels like.
Yeah, no, it's a question that keeps coming up. When are we going back to Israel? And, will we go back to Israel and so on? I would say that, by now I consider myself, having lived for so long in 2 different cultures, I consider myself a native to both to some extent, but I'm probably still more Israeli given that, I grew up in that way. When my kids were born, I spent some time thinking about their value systems and what values do I actually want to instill in them. And I came up with a list, some of them are more Israeli, some of them are not. I wanted them to be curious as an example, I wanted to be audacious in the way they think. I certainly didn't grow up necessarily as audacious, but I think I developed it since I came here. I wanted to be resilient, and I think that's something that is probably much more emphasized in Israel than here. and thinking about how do they deal with difficulty as they grow up. But I also wanted to be empathetic, that I think, Israel, has done good or bad in sort of allowing people to grow up as empathetic. And so generally, I think that I look at it in a more fundamental way and try to think about what is it that I want them to have as sort of as values, and how do I encourage the behaviors that I associate with it. So that's sort of more on the maybe philosophical side. I think from our connection to Israel, it's been very important for us that the kids, speak Hebrew, write Hebrew. So, they speak Hebrew fluently. They're now starting to write as well. They're 6 years old. So they're now starting to basically learn how to write Hebrew as well. They grew up speaking 4 languages because we had sort of help that spoke French and Spanish, but so that's interesting and good for them. But I also send them, to study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, I think the joke there is that, I feel like my kids will be ready when they go back to Israel to sort of to deal with what's coming. So they're definitely working on sort of this resiliency or this ability to be aggressive when needed. And so I like to see that, they're citizens of the world. I think they grow up, again, based on those value systems, and hopefully will be ready to deal with whatever crazy world they'll have to face, in the next few years.
That was excellent. I often think of Israelis like my old dog, a Weimaraner, a beautiful, loving dog, extremely loyal, very athletic, but when threatened, believed in preemptive strike. So, any final comments, Shimon, Yulia, Dror, that you'd like to share with our audience? Shimon?
No.
You're good?
Glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. Yulia?
No, I think we covered it all. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Dror?
Just thank you for organizing this, and thank you. I know there's a lot of board members and donors and so on, on this call. So thank you for all your work. I do believe that BGU has a chance to grow to become significant at a global scale, and I'm excited for the work you're doing towards that.
Thank you. So I want to take this opportunity to once again thank Shimon, thank Yulia, and thank Dror for joining us. Our participants, you've stayed on the whole time. So this was a very interesting webinar featuring 3 of our prominent alumni from Ben-Gurion University doing incredible work in the United States. I want to thank Melody Mokhtarian and Kara Bortman and Ronnie Strongett and the team from AABGU that produces everything behind the scenes for their great work. I want to wish everyone a Shana Tova. Tomorrow night begins the Jewish New Year, and may this next year be an improved one from this last year, although there are lots of silver linings from the how we've learned how to function given the challenges this year that I think we'll take forward, and hopefully everybody is healthy and happy, and we wish you a sweet new year. David Ben-Gurion, the founder and first prime minister of Israel, and also the guy whose name is on the door of our university, once said, "Should Israel be afraid of dreams that can transform the natural order by science, imagination, and pioneering? Of course not, we shouldn't be afraid, for that is our vocation." In fact, it's the vocation of Shimon Elkabetz, Yulia Sapir-Lekhovitser, and Dror Berman. Thank you all for joining us today and for your great work. We're so proud of you. Everyone, stay healthy, and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.